Olivia Turner walked radiantly down the church aisle, but the firm voice of a maid brought everything to a halt, and what she revealed left the entire elite in shock. The hall of the Grand Palace glitters as if it had swallowed a piece of the sky. The mirrored ceiling scatters the crystal lights into shards of stars, and the glass aisle leading to the altar seems to float above a lake of white flowers. The orchestra tunes its strings. The scent of orchids, champagne, and money fills the air. Inside the service door, Julia adjusts her navy blue uniform and ties her hair with a worn-out elastic band. She tests the latch on the bucket, checks the spray bottle, folds the microfiber cloth. The radio clipped to her pocket crackles. "Altar sector. Spill. Right now," says a rushed voice. Her heartbeat falls into a quicker rhythm. A spill at the altar. Now. At the exact moment, the master of ceremonies announces the groom's entrance. On the other side of the door, polished laughter and expensive shoes scrape the floor like tiny violins. Julia pushes the cart, and the scene opens up before her like a stage. The elite turn their heads at once, a school of pearls and ties. There stands Richard Collins, suit immaculate, polite smile of someone born where the wind doesn't blow. At the foot of the altar, a red splash spreads into an ironic pool across the crystal. Expensive red wine spilled like polite blood. A pale waiter still trembles, tray in hand. "Careful, please," whispers the master of ceremonies, tense. Quickly and discreetly. Julia nods, kneels, and presses the cloth against the wine. The red unfurls into an arabesque. She sprays the solution and blots. The entire aisle holds its breath to watch someone scrub the floor. In her pocket, the flash drive weighs like a stone. Not heavy in truth, but dragging her down all the same. At the main entrance, a murmur rises. Olivia Turner appears in the doorway, in a gown daring the light to shine brighter than she does. A long veil, a calculated smile, her hand resting on her father's arm. When she notices the cleaning cart at the altar, her smile falters by a millimeter, just enough for someone very attentive to see. Julia sees it. "This is unacceptable," says a bridesmaid in a tone loud enough to be public. "At the altar?" Such a lack of preparation. Another chimes in, adjusting the necklace against her collarbone. Julia keeps scrubbing. The liquid gives way, but leaves a halo that demands patience. The voice on the radio urges speed. The orchestra holds a note, an entire aisle suspended in the twist of her cloth. Olivia reaches the altar steps. The master of ceremonies bows. The photographer shifts his angle to avoid catching the bucket, but Olivia makes a point of including it. "You," she says, pointing with the same delicacy one uses to highlight a flaw. "Could you be more careful? If it splashes on my dress, that's your whole year's salary, understood?" Light laughter, the kind that cuts without dirtying the mouth. The groom dips his head, embarrassed. Julia looks at her own hands, breathes, and continues. She rinses the cloth, presses it back into the red. "And that smell of disinfectant," Olivia raises a hand to her nose. Theatrical. "Let's remember, this is a wedding, not a hospital." The orchestra falters. A string slips off pitch. The waiter, still pale, recoils a step. Julia doesn't lift her eyes. Anyone who's ridden the subway at 5 in the morning knows how to hear humiliation like a weather forecast. It rains, but it passes. A guest whispers, "It was Henry who bumped into the waiter I saw." The word Henry slices the air and vanishes. Julia follows it as far as her eyes can. Henry Sullivan stands there, discreet, in the back, as if he came out of social obligation. He could be any other dark suit if not for the eyes, the kind that measure rooms, people, exits. He notices being seen and turns away. Olivia doesn't look at him, at least not now. Beneath the altar, something glimmers. Julia pushes aside a sprig of myrtle to catch the last trace of wine and finds among the flowers a crumpled napkin with a golden embroidered monogram. On the fabric, a lipstick mark in a precise shade of rosy wine. The same shade Olivia had tested in the dressing room 2 hours earlier, surrounded by friends laughing in rehearsed tones. Julia kept the napkin to finish later. The detail bites at her memory. "How long is this going to take?" asks Olivia, louder now. "I have a wedding to live." Julia rises halfway, just enough to meet the bride's eyes. The weight in her pocket seems to pull her toward the surface. Beside Olivia, Richard starts to step forward. "We can wait a minute," he says, kind, the first voice that doesn't wound. Olivia shoots him a look, asking him not to interfere. "It's not about waiting, love. It's about standards," she says, smiling for the cameras. "Our standards." The word drops like a seal. Julia feels it ripple through her skin. Standards. The word that shuts half the doors before anyone even knocks. She kneels again, finishes wiping the halo, gives a final shine with a dry cloth. The crystal returns a spotless aisle, no memory of wine. The master of ceremonies steps closer to thank her and, in the motion, tries to push Julia's cart out of the frame. She grips the metal bar. "Just a moment," she says, not loud, but tuned to a frequency the entire hall can hear. A chorus of eyes swivels. Olivia instinctively steps back, like someone recognizing an animal that only pretended to sleep. "Mrs. Olivia," Julia says, voice steady, "I don't splash dresses, and I don't miss my target." The silence cracks. Richard's brow tightens. Henry presses his lips. The orchestra lowers their instruments. "What are you insinuating?" Olivia enunciates each syllable like a blade. Julia releases the cart's bar, slips her hand into her pocket, feels the familiar contour of the flash drive. She could speak now, under all those chandeliers, with every phone raised. She could simply hand it over. But no. Not yet. Timing is a resource like any other. Anyone who's learned to clean mansions knows. Shine depends on the right order of steps. "That standards change when someone pulls the cloth," she answers, unflinching. And I pulled. The security staff shift, discreet. The master of ceremonies rehearses a speech to regain control. The music strains to restart. But the hall has already shifted, like when a window opens and the wind rushes in. The waiter who spilled the wine looks at Julia with gratitude that doesn't belong in that place. "Step off the aisle," Olivia commands, moistening her lips with the same shade that stained the napkin. "Now!" Julia takes a single step aside, just enough to avoid breaking protocol. She leans her face toward the bride, whispers without moving her lips. I know. It's a simple phrase, small enough to fit in a pocket, like the flash drive. But in the right ear, it opens cracks. Olivia blinks once, slower than usual. And for a second, there's no money, no orchids, no camera strong enough to hold the pose. Only the brief fear of someone imagining where truth might slip in. The orchestra resumes a waltz. The officiant lifts his hands. The glass aisle is spotless. The flowers breathe. Julia wheels her cart back to the side of the altar, unhurried. Each wheel squeaks in a sound she knows by heart. Passing by Richard, he gives her a nearly imperceptible nod of thanks. Not much, but enough to prove that somewhere in this hall, the word "thank you" still isn't fiction. The radio crackles again, calling her back to service. Julia ignores it for 3 steps. On the 4th, she brushes her thumb against the flash drive, like confirming an emergency number. She knows that from here on, no waltz can hold up a crooked story for long. And the hall, hungry for spectacle, has no idea what it's about to hear. A week before the wedding, the service room at the Grand Palace smelled of reheated coffee and disinfectant. A windowless white-tile cube with a formica table, 2 dented lockers, and a muted TV hanging on the wall. Julia kept her coat on the top shelf, the one too high for the others to reach. Up there, she hid a silver flash drive inside a plastic envelope of overdue bills. Nobody touched that. That night, the radio in her pocket crackled. Extra shift, Atlantico Building, Tower B. Late night cleaning, meeting ran long. It was the headquarters of Sullivan and Cobers, where Henry Sullivan's office was. The night shift bonus covered her bus fare for the week. Julia pulled her jacket tighter, grabbed the cart, and went. 2:15 in the morning. The Atlantico slept with motion lights, long corridors, carpet-swallowing footsteps, sensors that woke up when someone breathed. At reception, the guard Adam handed her a visitor badge and a warning. Mr. Henry stayed late. I think he left, but if he comes back, pretend you didn't see him. Julia smiled with her eyes. She cleaned rooms that smelled of leather and victory. When she reached the executive floor, the door was ajar. Inside, Henry's desk still carried the warmth of someone who'd just stood up. A glass with a lip mark, a shirt draped over the chair, a spread of contracts, and a cell phone buzzing alone like a fish out of water. She didn't touch it, just looked. The screen lit up with a name saved as Stella. Short, urgent messages. Wine plan confirmed. Waiter needed at 7:42 p.m. The cleaning lady has to be on stage. Julia's blood hammered in her ears. The cleaning lady, stage, a wedding as theater. Her finger itched. The phone buzzed again, this time showing a quick code and a messaging app notification. On the computer, the screen woke with her movement, already logged into the same messenger, mirrored. The session was open, guided by the history. No one had bothered to log out. She nudged the door shut with her foot, took 2 steps to the desk with the calm of someone walking a blade's edge. The mouse woke the list of chats, nicknames, faceless photos, nameless numbers. A red star marked Stella. She clicked. The texts were too clear to need imagination. The altar is glass. Any stain becomes a show. Waiter Marcus gets paid tomorrow. A low physical impact humiliation, high media impact. Richard foots the bill. You shine, my love. The attachments were worse. Short hotel clips, skin against skin, Olivia without her veil, not just intimacies, strategies whispered in between. When he signs the shareholders' agreement, you disappear for 15 days. Public opinion distracts. The board decides. Julia swallowed metal, glanced at the door, listened to the building breathe, pulled the plastic envelope from her backpack, slid out the silver flash drive. The USB clicked into the port. She created a folder named after her job, cleaning supplies, and began dragging files. Progress bars crawled, slow as guilt. On another tab, a folder on the computer blinked. Projects, Hydra. Hydra. Julia clicked. Inside, subfolders by date. Merger, buyout option, offshore. Digitally signed documents, instructions for a block vote on a board Richard thought he controlled. A spreadsheet titled Bride, a timeline of public appearances, trending searches. At the end, one line. Social catharsis event. Incident with employee. Reinforces class narrative. Her stomach flipped. She forced the air down her nose. Kept copying. Videos, screenshots, PDFs, audios. She closed her eyes for a moment, memorizing the folder order, just in case she ever needed to reopen blind. The doorknob turned. She yanked the flash drive without ejecting, shoved it in her pocket, and crouched in a reflex born of war, sliding under Henry's desk. Her heartbeat lodged in her throat. The door opened slowly. Expensive shoes stepped in. The cologne of the office's owner followed, tinged with sweet tobacco. "Left the phone?" said a voice. "Henry." "On the desk," answered another, deep, not used to speaking loud. "Eric." The waiter confirms at 10. The rest is aligned. The chair swiveled. Henry's hands thumped the desk. Keys clacked. Mouse clicked. He laughed low. "The city loves a well-dressed villain, Eric, and it needs a scapegoat. A cleaning lady tripping at the altar solves the equation. She almost stained the dress, look. Meanwhile, the board meeting runs." "And if something leaks?" Eric asked. You know how these girls have phones now. I control it. A pause of satisfaction. Mirroring is active. Nobody gets in here. And if someone does, Adam warns me. He's paid for that. Julia held her breath by instinct. The guard. Adam. Go home, Henry said at last. We'll lock the details tomorrow. And someone grab that phone before I forget again. The steps receded. The door shut. Julia stayed pressed to the carpet for another minute, waiting for her heart to return to her body. She crawled out, legs hollow, checked her pocket. The flash drive burned. She wiped the desk for real this time, erasing any trace of her touch. Looked up at the ceiling camera, a black dot with no light, and wondered if it had eyes. No time for theories. She scrubbed away her knee marks from the carpet, the kind no one else notices but she always sees. On her way out, in the anteroom, Adam was fixing his tie knot. His eyes snapped up too quickly, rehearsed. Finished? He asked. Finished, Julia said, handing back the badge. Attention is good. Curiosity is dangerous, he said, like a recitation. People disappear over files. Got it? She gripped her backpack strap harder than needed. Got it. On the empty bus, watching the city run backward through the windows, she pulled the flash drive from her pocket and stitched it into the lining of her backpack with 2 knots of thread. At home, she put the backpack inside another, that one inside the closet, and shoved a bucket in front. Tried to sleep, but the videos flickered under her eyelids like ads. Olivia smiling. Henry making plans with the cadence of counting money. The next day, the service room met her cold. A folded note lay on the Formica table, unsigned. Be careful what you carry. Glass cuts. The handwriting was a woman's, the kind taught in Christmas card calligraphy. Julia slipped the paper into her pocket and went on her rounds. At 10 a.m., her phone rang from an unknown number. Mrs. Julia? The voice was too neutral. Did you find anything last night? Sometimes we sweep what we shouldn't. Who is this? She asked. The call dropped. The radio in her pocket crackled. Shift change. Tonight, 7 p.m., you'll cover the altar. They'll need you there. Julia's heart understood before her brain did. The note, the call, the schedule. The board moved on its own, and the chosen piece was her. In the days that followed, she built a map in her head, saw waiter Marcus summoned to the admin office and leaving with eyes of someone whose pockets jingled. Heard 2 bridesmaids joke about how a little story would be great for engagement. Fished a press draft out of the recycling bin. Minor incident didn't tarnish impeccable ceremony. On the eve of the wedding, she went back to the Atlantico. Wanted to confirm if the browser session was still open, if the files were still there. The executive office door was locked. Not a problem for someone carrying master keys. A soft click, a twist, and the room opened as if it already belonged to her. The computer, this time, demanded a password. Julia scanned the desk. A scrap of paper in the corner with 3 numbers scribbled as if practicing a combination, 194207. She remembered the message, 7:42 p.m. Tried the sequences. On the 4th attempt, the machine yielded. Back to the chats. New attachments, new scripts. A document named Waltz. At the minute of the whine, the music would hold the chord. Written just like that. Shameless. She copied everything again. 2 flash drives now. One hidden in the broom's handle in the service room. The other sewn into her bra. Invisible stitch of war. On the wedding day, hours before the programmed waltz, Julia sat alone in the service room. Heard the building rehearse its rich footsteps in the hall. Ran her hand over the envelope of overdue bills and whispered her own name like a promise of survival. There was fear, the right kind, the kind that keeps you alive. There was anger, the right dose, the kind that flips the game without turning you into a monster. When the radio called, altar sector, spill, right now, she knew their script was standing. But so was hers. The wine, the glass aisle, the audience, the rehearsed laughter, all in place, and in her pocket, the silver stone that could shatter the whole chandelier. She pushed her card into the light, catching her own reflection in the crystal banister. She didn't see a cleaning lady, she saw a witness. And witnesses? Palaces have always feared them. The glass altar shone spotless, as if the wine had never existed. But the tension hanging in the air couldn't be wiped away with cloths or disinfectant. Julia stood still beside the cart, while eyes continued to pierce her. Olivia, standing at the center, adjusted her veil with rehearsed gestures, trying to retake control of the scene. The officiant cleared his throat, ready to resume the ceremony. That was when Julia felt her pocket throb. The flash drive seemed to pulse against her thigh as if asking to speak. And she knew, if she let that moment pass, there would be no other opening. She took a deep breath and spoke. "She isn't who you think she is." The sentence came out clear, though not loud. Even so, it echoed through the entire hall, as if the crystal chandeliers had carried it. The orchestra fell completely silent. One of the groomsmen dropped his champagne flute, and the crack of crystal on the floor sounded like confirmation. Olivia took a beat to react, but when she did, she chose poison. "How dare you!" Her voice rose, charged with calculated outrage. "Interrupt my wedding to make up lies? You're nothing but a cleaning lady!" The audience murmured in waves. Some laughed nervously, others traded intrigued glances. The word cleaning lady was spat like an insult, but Julia didn't shrink. She stood her ground, staring the bride down. "A cleaning lady, yes. Which is exactly why I see the dirt you pretend not to." The silence after her answer was absolute. Olivia paled for an instant, then recovered her commanding tone. "Richard, have this woman removed. Now!" The groom hesitated. He was used to resolving crises with a signature, a handshake, a multi-million transfer. But this wasn't a merger. This was the wedding itself. A gray-haired man rose among the guests. It was George Anderson, former minister and partner in several of Richard's ventures. His voice rang firm, with the authority of someone who didn't ask for attention. He demanded it. "Wait, I want to hear what she has to say." The murmurs swelled into a commotion. One of the security guards stepped back, looking to Richard for instructions. Olivia's eyes flared. "This is ridiculous. An intruder trying to steal the spotlight." George raised a hand for calm. "I've seen plenty of social theater, Olivia, but when someone risks their own skin to speak in front of all these people, it's because it's serious." Richard ran a hand over his face, breathing heavy. His gaze traveled from the bride to Julia, then out to the guests, all held in a suffocating suspense. "Officiant, a moment," he said, officially halting the ritual. The man at the altar, confused, closed the ceremony book. The orchestra lowered their instruments for good, and the whole hall leaned toward Julia, as if the fate of the party had come to rest in her hands. Olivia stepped forward twice, her voice stripped of its delicate varnish. "You'll regret every word." Julia didn't blink. "Not as much as you'll regret what you're hiding." The crack was open. The most luxurious wedding of the year had become a public courtroom, and the first witness had just stood up against the bride. The silence was no longer just silence. It was expectation, shock, and fear, all compressed beneath the same crystal roof. Julia felt the eyes of the elite piercing her like blades. Her pocket burned, the flash drive throbbing like a truth imprisoned. Richard, still at the altar, broke the stillness with a sharp question. "What exactly are you insinuating?" The entire hall held its breath. Olivia turned to him, her face still controlled but her eyes sparking. "Richard, darling, don't stoop to this. This woman just wants attention, nothing more. People like her get paid to invent scandals." Julia inhaled deeply. She knew this was the moment. If she backed down, she would be just another maid humiliated in front of 100 witnesses. but if she stepped forward, the whole palace might collapse. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the silver flash drive, and raised it for all to see. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to see with your own eyes." Tension burst into whispers. Former Minister George Anderson rose once more, steady. "Richard, let her show it. If it's a lie, everyone will see. If it's true, better now than too late." Richard hesitated, his eyes locked on the object in Julia's hand. Then he motioned to one of the sound and video technicians. The man, nervous, took the flash drive and hurried to the control booth. Olivia tried to step forward, but Richard gripped her arm. "If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear," he said, his voice harder than ever. The screens that had shown flowers and soft lights went dark. The first image appeared. A hotel room, security camera, two bodies intertwined. The bride's face, unmistakable. The face of Henry Sullivan, clear as daylight. Stifled laughter filled the hall, then a sequence of audio clips. "He trusts too much. He doesn't notice anything. Once they sign the agreement, he won't have a choice. And then, my love, it will be us at the top." The hall erupted in murmurs. Some guests covered their mouths, others laughed in shock, some stood from their chairs. The word betrayal spread like fire among them. Olivia tried to laugh, but the sound came out nervous, cracked. "This is a cheap fake, a grotesque edit. Who would believe that I would," said a woman's voice from the crowd. One of the bridesmaids, silent until then. "That lipstick is the same one you tested with me in the dressing room." The blow landed like a dry crack. Richard shut his eyes, his jaw rigid. "Play the rest of the video," he ordered. New files appeared, this time screenshots. Conversations between Olivia and Henry, planning meetings, mocking Richard's naivete, discussing timelines. There was no way to deny it. The tide turned completely. What had been muffled laughter became open outrage. Guests muttered words like shame, scandal, scheme. The shimmer of Olivia's dress seemed to have lost its glow. Desperate, she broke her pose. She lunged at Julia, veil dragging across the floor, eyes unhinged. "You wretch! You ruined everything!" The attack was quick, but Julia didn't step back. A security guard intercepted, holding the bride by the arms. The hall reacted with shouts and jeers. Phones were already recording every move, turning her public fall into an eternal spectacle. Julia stood firm, her face serene in contrast to Olivia's desperation. For the first time that night, the cleaning lady did not look invisible. She looked unshakable, and the elite who once scorned her now looked at her not with laughter, but with respect, and with fear of what else she might still reveal. The hall, still reeling from the exposure of adultery, seemed breathless for anything more. But the flash drive hadn't revealed everything. Julia knew what it held went far beyond secret encounters and clandestine vows of love. It was a machine that fused passion and power, bed and boardroom. The screens still flickered when Richard raised his hand, calling for silence. His voice came out firm, yet loaded with disbelief. "I want you to continue. Show it all." The technician, pale, clicked on the next folder. The screen filled with digital documents. Email headers, spreadsheets, and contracts appeared in sequence. The title of the first file glared in bold letters, Project Hydra. A new murmur rippled through the hall. Executives exchanged glances, some recognizing the name. Richard's brow furrowed. The attached audio began, Henry's voice, crisp and calculated. "Olivia, after the ceremony, the press's attention will be on you two. That's the perfect moment. While they publish pictures of the dress, the board approves the transfer of shares. The document is ready. Richard won't realize until it's too late." The next image showed a stock purchase agreement, with clauses granting unrestricted voting power to a block of investors. At the bottom, a digital signature dropped like a bomb in the hall, Brian Parker. Richard went pale. Brian wasn't just a partner. He was a childhood friend, an advisor, the very godfather of this wedding. Sitting 2 rows away, Brian lowered his gaze, his clasped hands trembling. "Brian," Richard's voice cracked, more wounded than furious. "You?" The guests burst into outraged chatter. Some stepped away from the man as if betrayal itself were contagious. "This is absurd," Brian tried, rising to his feet. "These files could have been tampered with. There's no guarantee of authenticity." But another email appeared on the screen, its subject line unmistakable. "Toast finalized." The body read, "The spilled wine will be the curtain. The maid's fall ensures distraction." Richard signs without question. Fortune settled. The audience reacted with a mix of disgust and horror. The groom no longer hid his nausea. Olivia, restrained by security, screamed like a cornered beast. "It's a lie! A conspiracy against me! Everything is fake!" But no one seemed to hear. The evidence was there, undeniable, projected on giant screens before all of high society. This wasn't just betrayal of body and heart. It was a scheme to steal fortunes, topple empires, and humiliate Richard before the entire nation. George Anderson, the former minister, raised his voice once more. "There's the proof of what I always suspected. This wedding wasn't a union. It was an acquisition, and the worst kind of it." Richard brought a hand to his face, staggering back a step. The glass altar seemed to tremble beneath him. What was meant to be the most glorious day of his life was revealed as a theater of betrayals, and the star of the farce wore a white dress. The corporate chessboard lay exposed. The flowers, the music, the flashes were nothing but a curtain for $1 billion heist. And the one who pulled it away wasn't an executive, a lawyer, or a board member. It was the invisible cleaning lady no one had factored into the equation. And in that instant, everyone understood. The acquisition game had just turned against its own players. The hall, already torn apart by proof of adultery and conspiracy, sank into a heavy silence. Only the sounds of labored breathing, of chairs creaking beneath restless bodies. At the center of it all, Olivia Turner, the bride who minutes ago reigned as an icon of beauty and power, now turned into a spectacle of ruin. She struggled against the guard's hands, her veil tearing with a sharp rip. Her hair, once meticulously styled, fell loose across her face. Her eyes, frantic, searched for a culprit other than herself. "This is a setup!" she screamed, her voice nearly hysterical. "These files are fake! Forged to destroy me!" She lunged at the technician controlling the screen and tried to snatch the flash drive. The gesture was desperate, erratic, but the guests, instead of applauding her outrage, recoiled in disgust. It didn't look like defense. It looked like fear of the truth. "Olivia, enough!" Richard's voice thundered, restrained but sharp. He stepped toward her, gripping her shoulders. "No more theatrics. I want to hear it from you. Is it true?" Her eyes widened, searching for a shred of compassion. "Richard, you know I love you. They're trying to tear us apart. That flash drive could have come from anywhere. That woman," she pointed at Julia with hatred. "That woman has always envied me. She made it all up." But no one reacted to the attack on Julia. The tide had turned. The elite who once laughed at the maid on the altar now looked at her with uneasy respect. For the first time, Olivia was alone. Brian Parker, the exposed accomplice, tried to step in. "Richard, think rationally. This reveal is too convenient. You can't believe everything you see on a screen." "Shut up, Brian." Richard cut him off, ice in his tone. "I recognize your signature. I recognize the terms. I recognize your betrayal." The hall vibrated with murmurs and raised phones. Every word became a public record, impossible to erase. In panic, Olivia tried a new tactic. She dropped to her knees, hands clasped in supplication. "Richard, I only did what I did to protect us. Henry promised me it was the only way. I just wanted you to have even more power." The plea came out shaky, incoherent. No one believed it. The white dress now looked like a sloppy disguise, a stained uniform. Richard stepped back twice, his eyes brimming. I was blind. Blind for believing in a perfect image, for mistaking shine for character. But never again. The sentence landed final. The bridesmaids quietly moved away from Olivia, as if contact might be contagious. The guests muttered harsh words: schemer, fraud, shame. The social circle closed in. Olivia tried to rise, but her legs gave out. She sank onto the floor of the altar, her torn veil spread like a sheet of defeat. No more pose, no more mask. Only a broken woman before those who once idolized her. And among all the elite drawing back, only Julia remained standing, still, the uncomfortable witness to a truth no one had managed to silence. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Richard's final word. The groom stood at the altar, breathing deeply, his face torn between pain and fury. The evidence still echoed in everyone's minds, the screens frozen on contracts and messages that left no room for doubt. Olivia, collapsed on the floor, stretched her hands out in desperation. Richard, please. We can get past this. Don't let her ruin our day. I love you. I've always loved you. Her voice no longer carried weight. They were empty words, flung into the air, powerless to reverse the tide already dragging her away. Richard raised his hand, calling for silence. The gesture alone was enough to hush the murmurs. Then his voice rang out, firm as steel. This wedding is canceled. The impact was immediate. Some guests applauded, others gasped in shock. The officiant closed the ceremony book like someone sealing a coffin. Olivia let out a strangled cry, trying to rise. No! You can't humiliate me like this! You need me, Richard! I am your image, your queen! But what answered her were not words of support. They were boos, long, continuous pouring from every corner of the hall. Cell phone cameras captured every tear, every attempt at resistance. The woman who had entered as the perfect bride was now nothing but a living headline of scandal. Security approached. Olivia thrashed, but the stage was gone. Only the fall remained. She was dragged down the glass aisle to the sound of jeers, flashes, and shouts of outrage. Her veil snagged on a chair along the way, a white symbol now stained with shame. Richard didn't look away until she disappeared through the main door. Only then did he breathe deeply, as if shedding a weight carried for years. It's over, he said, almost to himself. The entire hall then turned toward Julia. The woman who had entered invisible, carrying buckets and cloths, was now the absolute center of attention. No look of disdain remained, only respect. George Anderson was the first to approach. He clasped her hand and lifted it as if proclaiming victory. This woman had the courage none of us had. She brought the truth to light. The hall erupted in applause. Julia, who so many times had bowed silently so as not to disturb others' parties, now stood tall as a symbol of justice. The guards who once waited to remove her now protected her. The cameras that once ignored her now fought for every second of her image. She drew a deep breath, feeling the clapping vibrate against the crystal walls. It wasn't vanity that filled her, but relief. The lie had roared loud, but the truth had survived. And survived through the voice of the one they had all tried to silence. Richard stepped closer. His eyes were still red, but his expression was firm. Julia, I don't know how to thank you. You saved more than my name. You saved my life. She simply nodded, with quiet simplicity. The truth didn't need to stay trapped in anyone's pocket. It just needed to be told. And under the glare of flashes and the heat of applause, Julia walked across the hall that had once despised her, not as an invisible maid, but as a heroine, the living proof that no matter how much luxury tries to hide it, dirt always comes to the surface. And that night, beneath the crystal ceiling, high society learned that the most expensive dress may tear, but the truth The truth never does. In the end, luxury may shine, but it's the truth that truly lights the way. Tell me, if it were you in Mariana's place, would you have the courage to pull the curtain? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. It's the simplest way to keep alive a voice that should never be silenced.